planning this session, folks were asking like what kind of ideas we had about how to talk about Ascend and to talk about all our partners and stuff. And we're a premier partner of Snowflake. And so I know you and I have worked together in the past, so your name popped up at the top of my list, not just because you're a golfing buddy, but also because, we tend to do some business together. So one of the things I wanted to do was talk through a little bit about how you see, and from your side of the world, like you're a Snowflake person. So from your side of the world, kind of maybe what are the one or two things that customers, have questions about Snowpark or maybe struggle to use it or have super successes using it and that kind of thing. So what's your experience there?
Yeah, I think at its core, what it changes is how customers can interact with the platform. Historically, Snowflake was a pure SQL-based engine. We handled SQL great, but you kind of had to pull data out if you wanted to process it in other languages. And really what Snowpark has done is said, hey, for your native Java, Scala, Python code, rather than pulling it out into another engine, just have that processing all stay within Snowflake. That shift is just, it's fundamentally different than the way we've been thinking about data architecture for the last 20 years, right? When you look at designing architecture, you're often purpose building, here's the place I'm going to store this type of data, and here's the place I'm going to do processing on that type of data for this particular workload. And you stitch these things together. And, this idea with Snowpark, instead of taking your data and taking it to these disparate compute resources, bring the compute to your data. And now being able to have one place to store all of your data and process it in any language you want, we think there's huge potential for our customers.
Yeah, awesome. I know we here at Ascend use various platforms, but I've been looking very deeply into Snowpark as far as performance versus what you would do outside of Snowpark with Python, for example, or Java or Scala. Do you see performance improvements and other kind of things like that, or security things that are much better in Snowpark, in your opinion? Obviously, it's biased.
This is, of course, one of those mileage will vary type scenarios. But in general, we are seeing quite a few of our customers that are taking traditional Spark workloads, moving that to Snowflake, and seeing, again, mileage will vary, but 25 to 50% is probably a pretty conservative estimate in terms of performance improvement. And then because of how Snowflake bills, performance improvement also translates to cost improvement. So we're seeing massive cost savings by doing that. And that's the easy to catch your attention. Hey, we can save money by reducing your cost, your Spark spend. But you hit on that second piece that I think is almost even more critical, is the governance side of it. In a traditional architecture, and having every single product that you add to your stack, you're adding another pane in which you have to manage and think through security, right? How are you doing role-based access control in your file system versus what your query engine is allowed to see? And by eliminating that, having a single place that data is being stored and processed, it also reduces the number of places you're thinking about managing security. You have one pane of glass to manage that across all of your data assets. And ultimately, by doing that, improving your security posture.
That's awesome. So, Josh, I know that one of the reasons I got excited about joining Ascend was because of the way we help people with Snowpark, which I think is amazing. So this is Snowflake's documentation, how to use data frames, and it does a really good job telling you how to do it. What you and I can do is see how that's done in Ascend. Let's start a little flow in Ascend. So this is Ascend with data flow. So folks who have been watching the other summit activities have seen this quite a bit, but let's do a little live example here of building some Snowpark. So we're going to read some data in. I'm just going to grab some weather data. So I'm going to read in a little bit of data here. Let's just go with a prefix, and we're going to load in some taxi data, and it's CSV data with a header. So let's have a look at this. I think it's a few million records, but no big deal, right? So let's just create that. So we have this really nice set of taxi data that's going to come in. Normally with Snowpark, right, Josh? You'd have to set up a Python environment locally, that kind of stuff to
Yep.
get it to work, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So on Ascend, notice we're reading the data in, it's coming through the partitions, but that'll finish in a minute. But in Ascend, we can just create a transform here. And by default, we have a Snowflake SQL, which is also awesome. And we can talk about that a little if you want. But we also have this Snowpark option here, which is fantastic. I'm just going to create one here. How about that? I'm going to remove this comment just to make the code smaller. So this first transform isn't going to do anything useful. But what do you think about that?
You know, it's funny because, and I'm going to play into your story of how you got to Ascend, but you know, at Snowflake, our core kind of belief around building product is we want to make the platform itself as easy to use, as easy to run. You know, it should be fast without you having to play with a bunch of parameters. And what we say in terms of your code is bring whatever code you want, wherever you want to develop, however you want to develop, you have the freedom to do that. But ultimately, that does put a burden on thinking about where you're maintaining these environments. And I think the huge benefit we see with, you know, Ascend and Snowflake working together is you've kind of taken the mentality of, hey, building data pipelines, all of the code around that, let's automate everything. Let's make everything as easy to manage and maintain. We're going to check everything in against a repository. And the fact that, you know, now through a UI in the web, you have full development access with a couple clicks of a button, and then having all of that ease of use inside of Snowflake, it's like, you know, the two of these are so complementary in terms of the type of product we're trying to build and in terms of experience we're delivering to customers.
Yeah, we like to say at Ascend that we make Snowflake even more awesome than it already is. So I'm a fan, but I think making it easy is key. So let's get back to the demo here, and let's do something useful. So what I did wasn't necessarily compelling, but let's do this. I'm just going to rename this and call this a Snowpark transform. As you know, in Ascend's world, we like to keep the semantics of what you're doing on your data flows the same as a database. So this table will show up in Snowflake just as is. But let's create some actual value here. I'm going to cut and paste a little bit of code in here, and we're going to calculate some actual Python. So I'm going to delete this, and we're just going to do a little group by here, and we're going to have some total fares and group by with data pickup and that kind of stuff. So this is taxi data. So why not, right? So we can update this. And so back to your change management point, you know, here at Ascend, we're managing all of this in the background so that you can do things like add columns and do all kinds of interesting things with the code and make it work that way. So super valuable there. We can also do this where if we're going to create transforms here with Snowflake SQL, we can do both at the same time. So we can actually go back and forth between all of the languages. How would you do that without a platform like Ascend, Josh? Would you need to have like you'd have to have another environment, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, we'll have customers that'll use things like Airflow to coordinate, you know, running and scheduling of things. They might use their enterprise scheduler, you know, but the reality is a lot of these platforms just don't offer kind of that easy interface, that flexibility. And, you know, just as easily as you showed that, the ability for one group of users who are SQL proficient and, you know, DBAs in their background and will live and breathe SQL for the rest of their life. And then maybe some younger developers coming in that, you know, have learned Python from the age of 4. You now have this experience where both of those can add value in the same platform. And the speed at which that's going to allow customers to deploy and productize their data assets. You know, I'm bullish and thinking, you know, we're never, or we haven't yet seen kind of the speed at which we'll be able to go to market with these things, which is really exciting.
That is super exciting, I think, too. It's pretty amazing. So if we go back to the demo real quick, I think this might be really interesting for folks to see going back and forth from Snowpark to SQL to back to Snowpark. Because I know in my experience doing certain things in SQL is really easy, right? If you're just doing a basic transform or you're changing a data type or you're doing something like that. But I know Python has a lot of advantages too, right, Josh? Like if you're running a model, like people talk about AI and stuff all the time, right?
Yeah, sure.
So we could see about that. And then one last thing on the change management, if we were to like sort of add a column here, it would be really interesting to sort of watch this happen let's call this a Snowpark demo. We'll call the column that, and let's do a, let's just say Snowflake is awesome. And so we're adding a column here. So normally I would have to do a bunch of alter table, create table, all that kind of stuff. But you can see here in Ascend, we go ahead and manage this for you. So we added this column, so it's being managed. And then we're adamant at Ascend that the automation should continue downstream as much as possible. So as soon as we give this a second, we can see that the schema downstream has also been coerced. So we're managing this data in a really nice way downstream, making it super easy to affect change in management and things. I know back to the beginning of what we were talking about, that this got me so excited about Ascend on top of Snowflake, because you get the power of this platform, you get this ability to manipulate it, all of the automation, including the API, SDK, CLI, and you can start to work with Ascend in ways that maybe are much faster, I think, for sure, with the user experience. And so just to summarize, there's a couple things of the value props that Ascend is bringing on top using Snowflake and Snowpark. One is you don't have to do any create table statements. There's no DDL work. You don't have to worry about data types other than in your code. If you want something to be a number, make it a number, and Ascend will take care of it. Also, the seamless flow, right, from Snowpark to Snowflake, SQL, and back again, as you need. So if you have a bunch of SQL stuff and then you want to call a model, say a Python model, and then continue on, all that's possible. And then, another topic that we probably don't need to get into here, but partitioning matters too, especially with really, really large data. So there was a presentation earlier in the summit. Cheyenne did a great job talking about partitioning 101 for Ascend. So we do some really, really cool things with data partitions, which are different than micro partitions in Snowflake, just so we're clear. But this is the kind of stuff that Ascend is helping with on Snowpark. So Josh, I was with a customer the other day, and I was noticing that they were using a lot of Spark, and that was because they came from Spark. So they picked up the stuff and they put it in Ascend. But when we converted that to Snowpark, it was almost 10 times faster for execution, I was like, this is amazing. And I want to reproduce that actually as a case study with you at some point. But I think the Snowpark value prop for Python development in particular is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think what the part of the reason I love Snowflake and Ascend together so much is that fundamentally what both companies are trying to do is take away the non-value activity from anyone using the environment, right? Mm-hmm. There is no value in someone managing DDLs and tables, right? If here are the columns that I need, and what is important to the business, focus on that. Focus on the business logic. Focus on how you're going to get this data in a more usable way. Managing, breaking changes on how, going from one data type to another, and it's like that doesn't add any value, right? Same thing on the performance side. One of the big things we see, especially with Spark, is that in a lot of scenarios you could get Spark to work, but the amount of time you're spending, tweaking knobs, changing configurations, managing runtime environments, doing upgrades, right? Those aren't value add things to the organization. Yep. And so if we as a platform can automate, can remove all of that complexity and just have it work fast out of the box, the value we can get out of those engineers, out of the DBAs and folks working on the system, it's just gonna, there's so much potential if we can those tasks. And you can kind of see that between both platforms is just get rid of the non-value activity and start driving value.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think version control, that's one of the reasons why buying software is really great, because I know as a Snowflake customer before, when Snowflake got updated, I didn't necessarily even know unless I read the release notes, but it just sort of happens. And the same for Ascend. If we're changing, a runtime version of Spark or Kubernetes, it gets an update or whatever underneath the covers, again, as a customer, you don't have to deal with it. I do have a slide up here too, which is something that I don't think you're going to see for any of your other partners. So I'm just plugging us a little bit in that we can build for the flow we just built, we can just even start to build lineage. You can start to build lineage all the way through, including Python and into SQL and all the way through. And we can track things like byte consumption, record counts. I hope to someday do like credit consumption across data flow, data services, that kind of stuff too. So these are the kind of things that we're looking at as far as helping enterprise organizations fully leverage Snowflake. Because I think there's a lot of underutilized, this is my opinion, but there's a lot of underutilized things that Snowflake does. And I think Snowpark might be one of those. Mm-hmm. And I'm really glad to be able to push the acceleration button on that for users that are interested in doing that, for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
So I did have a few resources here. I didn't ask you, but I did look through Snowflake's docs here, and there's some great Snowpark documentation. I think one of the things that I appreciate about Snowflake is the level of documentation is like really good.
Yep.
And I know that there's a Python, but also a Java Scala set of docs that are pretty amazing. And then Ascend, we have our own set of documentation on how to do it. Fortunately, our docs are angled more toward like getting the work done and less around like how to actually use it, because we do almost all the work for our customers. So it's more about like figuring out how you want to build a flow and less about actually using Snowpark, which is literally just a menu choice plus a language. Good. So I think we have time for a few questions. I know I got one the other day, and the question was, let me just pull it up here. The question was, what about machine learning on using Snowpark?
Yeah.
What options are available, and how does that mean?
So right now, we do have support for what we call high memory warehouses. So if you're within the Snowflake ecosystem, our processing engine we call virtual warehouses. Those warehouses, spin up, spin down automatically for you. We're talking 250 millisecond. But particularly around machine learning training, you generally get into very high memory intensive type workloads. And so it's a different type. It's a menu select down that will give you, I think it's 10 times. I'd have to go back look at our docs, but it's significantly more memory per node to allow some of those training type modules. Now, there are some cases, GPU tends to come up in these areas. GPUs on our roadmap, we will support GPU type warehouse types in the future. But really, what we've seen is the majority of these types of workloads, really it's that high memory you got to solve for. And that is something that we do have support for today.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, users in Ascend can configure down to the warehouse, down to the data service level. They can put different warehouses in. So we could create a machine learning data flow and attach that high memory to it. I'm assuming there's a pricing difference or something, but whatever, you could attach that warehouse to it and then track the consumption for those pipelines separately. I think that would be awesome from a FinOps perspective. So another question I got was, what about local machine development? Like, how does that work? And I will say that Ascend has a Python library that we use externally for Spark development, but I know that we're also in our pipeline putting together some decorators for Snowpark so that you can run Snowpark locally on your machine, get debug statements and potentially do that kind of work, and then push the code up into Ascend and have it execute. So you have a much better mock-based local machine environment, so you can get through some complex logic without having to reuse a bunch of stuff or unnecessarily run code that doesn't necessarily work yet. So I think that's a good experience.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things we've seen, right? So if I really strip down what Snowpark is all about, is we are taking the processing and we are pushing it from wherever that local code was moving, and it's getting all pushed directly into Snowflake. And so whether you're developing on a local machine, whether you're developing in a cloud-hosted notebook, the key here is that what the Snowpark library we give is going to convert that code into, so I guess the best analogy you can think of is just like PySpark takes your Python executable code, converts it into Spark, readable executable code. Snowpark, the library, is doing the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And so what that means is that, you have the ability with that client library, that Snowpark client library, to do development anywhere you want, and you're still going to be able to take advantage of that processing, staying central, staying governed, staying managed, all in one single place.
Mm-hmm. And then, so give us, just to extend that a little bit, do you want to give people like a little insight into why Snowpark is so much more performant in general, especially if your data's in Snowflake?
Yeah. So one of the things you'll often see, generally with any other compute engine, is, if I wanted, and we've had a Spark connector for years, so we've seen customers that will use Spark. But what you're having to do in those scenarios is you're saying, hey, Spark would like to run this job. It's going to have to suck all of that data out into that Spark engine, process it there, and then push it back, where just dumping it in the data lake, pushing it back to Snowflake. What under the covers Snowflake is doing is it's leveraging, the 10 years of development we've done on our SQL-based engine, leveraging all of the things like we do with micro-partitioning and pruning, or query pruning, all of those types of things. And it's bringing all of that refinement and optimization to your same code. It's kind of cool if you actually look at data frame as it's executed, that actually is getting converted into SQL on the fly, and then using our optimized engine to process all of that.
So really, a lot of the decomposition of the actual work is pushed back into your query engine, which is awesome. Absolutely. Your optimizer is pretty cool the way it works. So then as a developer, I'm pretty sure there's a few limitations to Snowpark, right? Like making external requests, I think, in some libraries.
Yeah.
Is that true? So,
yes. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so I'm gonna change my share back over here. So this is the flow we were working on. So one of the things that I think Ascend, and I didn't do this in the original presentation, but one of the things that I think we fill a gap on also to add some more value is use PySpark, so that you could actually run some PySpark jobs if you needed to do something that Snowpark couldn't do. So then there's really no excuse to not use Snowpark because you can use Snowpark first, you can use SnowSQL, and then in the off chance that you have some other problem to solve, Ascend can fill that gap with a little bit of PySpark. So, and I know from that customer I was talking about that it's not as performant and doesn't work as well, and the total cost is likely higher because you're consuming all this AWS or whatever cloud resources than Snowflake. But I think adding that flexibility, I see that actually in use quite a bit for customers. So I'm sure it's on your roadmap too. So I think we're happy to happy to have people use Snowpark alone if they can, for sure. So that's good.
Yeah.
And then go ahead.
Yeah, just the where our development focus is around building the core platform, right? Snowflake, we want to be the place you store data and you process data. And I remember when you told me you were going to go to Ascend, I was like, Ascend, what is that? Like, what are you doing? And the more, we kind of walk through it together, is just seeing, to your point, right? Here's a limitation. I can't do X, Y, and Z. And the fact that, 2 or 3 clicks, right, I can put that into Ascend, I can pull the data back. I have that flexibility to be able to move data across the entire ecosystem, not have to worry about performance, not have to worry about security, right? Because we're leveraging kind of that one platform with Snowflake. These two platforms working together, it seems like, this is it, right? This is the, the solution that, we've all been hoping for.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great. Thanks for saying that, Josh. I know Snowflake is not only a great partner, but the technology is really amazing. And I know that it comes up in almost every customer conversation, whether they're a customer of Snowflake or not. There's at least questions about it, because I think Snowpark alone is compelling, but let alone all the rest of it is pretty interesting. So let's see. I think we have another question. Let me just see here. Yeah, so this one's probably for you, Josh, like what's on the roadmap for Snowpark? Are there things that are coming up in the future that we should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I think
I actually want to know too, because Ascend wants to keep up with it if we need to. So
yeah, one of the exciting capabilities we announced last year is the acquisition of Streamlit. So Streamlit is an open source Python library that allows you to quickly build Python apps that are web hosted. So imagine 30 lines of Python code, query some data, but build some filters, create like a quick, dashboard type experience, and then have a web hosted URL to send someone to. What we're working on is actually taking that library, fully integrating it into Snowflake so that we can host those apps for you. And so what you'll be able to do is take that Python code, you can do all of your Snowpark transformations, but actually build interactive web applications that, with one URL you can send to customers. And it's been really exciting for me seeing the growth. One of the exciting things Snowflake does is around data sharing, right? Where two Snowflake customers, without having to move that data, can actually live query each other's data that they've been given, fully managed and governed, but they've been access to. Now being able to layer on top, hey, those machine learning models that you've trained, those can be shared now. Applications that you've built in Streamlit, those can be shared. And so the amount of things that we're going to be able to deliver from this customer to customer shared experience, quite frankly, I think is going to provide opportunities for interactions and exchanges of data in ways that we really haven't even thought of. Just because the technology burden to do those types of things was so costly, and we're seeing Snowflake reduce that pretty significantly.
That's amazing. I mean, I think the evolution is kind of clear there, and I know one of the things that lots of customers like about Snowflake is that your normal application stuff can move around, but Snowflake is a central place to keep your data. So, and I know this too. Ingesting data like we just did in the demo is so easy in Ascend. I know one of the things that I see our customers appreciate is they get the data into Snowflake more quickly, so that you can start to take advantage sooner of the power of Snowflake. But then also, Ascend is managing your lineage and your changes and like doing all of that work for you too. So you're getting this like double benefit by really looking at both of the tools at the same time. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. Good. I had one more question that I know of. I'm going to share this other tab. The question is how is the data stored in Snowflake when Ascend is working on it? So I have a share here. I figured I'd just bring this up. This is our Snowflake environment, Ascend Snowflake environment. And you can see I have my Snowpark demo here, and I have the tables that we just created right here in Snowflake. So there's a little Ascend metadata table, and there's a bunch of data in here. So semantically speaking, at Ascend, we're very much fans of making sure that when you're using Ascend, if you go to look at a Snowflake under the covers, it looks what you would expect it to look like. That way you can attach your BI tools, or you can do, the application stuff you were just talking about. Perhaps that attaches to a table. Or you can do a Snowflake share. You can put a Snowflake share right on top of it and publish it to Marketplace, the data marketplace. So I think that's really great. That was the end of questions. What about Snowflake Summit? I know we're going there, and we'll be there in June. I think it's in Vegas again, right?
It sure is. Yep.
So are you going to be lucky enough to go this year?
We're still figuring that out. It's an interesting, we actually are using Snowflake to do because everything we're trying to figure out is what's the right staff to participant ratio. Sure. And so we're actually using some of our forecasting capabilities to try and figure out like how many staff do we need for this thing and who are we going to send. But it is very exciting. We weren't quite sure we were live last year back in person, and demand, it was shifted, right? Folks were signing up a lot later because they weren't sure on travel plans and all that kind of stuff. but had a great one last year. And I think this year everyone's kind of back into, travel mode. And yeah, I think it'll be a great event.
I know Carissa is going to be there, and I know I'm there because my data mesh talk got accepted. So we're going to be talking about how to build a data mesh with Ascend on Snowflake. It's going to be awesome. So
love that. That's going to be so much fun. So.
It is, yeah. Great.
All right.
Well, Josh, thank you for your time, my friend.
Yeah.
I know your time is hard to come by, so I was really lucky to score you right here. So that's good. Thanks.
My pleasure.
Yeah, awesome. Great discussion.